Power BI Dashboard in a Day 2023. The best way to learn Power BI is to get in and do a real-life dashboard in a day. It's part of the Microsoft training for Microsoft Power BI. You can Google Dashboard in a Day 2023 and follow along, download the files. We're going to go through all 5 of the labs, and in real time it takes about 4 hours. We're going to break this down into multiple videos, go through step by step how to learn Power BI Dashboard in a Day 2023. This is part 1, and we're going to be loading multiple sources of data. We're going to load a text file, we're going to load a CSV, and we're also going to load from some files from a folder. Dashboard in a Day part 1, loading data from Lab 1 2023. Let's go to Power BI. The best way to learn Power BI is to get inside the Power BI desktop version and start to experiment and start to use real data in Power BI. We are going to be doing a dashboard in a day, which is found online. If you search dashboard in a day, you will see the popular Microsoft version that allows you to download data, work with data, and create a dashboard. And it's designed to be completed in 3 to 4 hours in a classroom setting. So we're going to do it online and digitally. You can follow along. And again, if you want to search for the files, just search dashboard in a day, and that will bring you to the Microsoft website. Now, in this lab, there are 5 labs, and in today we are going to start off with Lab 1, which Lab 1 talks about preparing and loading data. And then we're going to add some data in this section, and we're going to be adding some CSV data and some Excel data. So the first thing you want to do is go inside Power BI, and we are going to add a CSV file. The CSV file is under Get Data, and there's over 300 data sources inside Power BI that you can connect to. And the first one we are going to connect to load into the Power Query Editor is a text CSV file. And that text CSV file is going to be called sales. And that is the name of the file. So we are going to open that. At this point, the Power Query Editor shows up, and you will see the different columns. We have product ID, we have date, we have zip, we have units, and we have revenue. And if you have never used Power Query, we're going to learn more about Power Query, but this will load the data. So the first thing we are going to do is you always want to take a look at your data before you load it, unless you know it's absolutely perfect. A lot of the data analysis job is transforming that data. We are going to select Transform Data, and that will bring up the Power Query Editor. At this point, we have product ID, date, zip, units, and revenue. And if you noticed on the right-hand side, it changed the type. The next thing, the only data transformation we're going to make in this first section is this zip code, which is a zip code. They have loaded it as a default of a whole number, which is what the 123 symbol is. We are going to change that zip code to a text. And then it's going to ask you to replace the current step or add a new step. And we are going to replace the current step. And now we have zip as a text type of file. So that is our first data source. We have loaded a sales file, and we have updated the type of data to a text for the zip code. So the next thing we're going to do is add some more data sources. The power of Power BI is that you can add multiple tables into a report. So on the home screen, we are going to select the new source. And this next source is going to be our dimension tables. And dimension tables, we'll talk more about that. You have fact tables in Power BI and you have dimension tables. And you want to have them look up the fact table to the dimension table. So when we select the dimension table, we're going to see in the navigator screen that we have some different options. We have a product table, a geography table, a manufacturer table, and a product table. So the ones that we want to load into the file, by checking the box, we will load in the product table. We see all of the different items in the product table. Then we will load in the geo table, and then we will load in the manufacturer table. So we can bring in 3 data sources all at once. So at this time, we are going to click the OK button. Now we have a series of tables on the left-hand side. We have the sales table. Then we just loaded the product table, the geo table, and the manufacturer table. We're going to add another source. So we're going to go back up to the new source under the home menu. And this time around, we are going to add file from a folder. You can grab data from a folder to grab multiple files if they have the same format. So under the new source, we're going to select more. That brings up all of our options. And we are going to select folder. We will connect to the folder table. And now we want to find the folder path that if you downloaded the files, you will get a chance to choose those files. So we have a folder called International Sales, and we will select that folder as our source of the files for the international sales. We have multiple countries with sales, and by selecting a folder, you'll notice that you have a couple of options here. You have a combine and transform or transform. So we are going to select the combine and transform data option. That is going to evaluate the query, and now we are going to bring up our combined files. And this is based on the first 200 rows for the data detection. And your sample file, you notice you have Australia, Canada, Germany, Japan, Mexico, and Nigeria. So we're going to base it on the first file, and it's an alphabetical, so it's going to be Australia. So we are going to select the OK button. Now we have our Power Query. We have international sales, we have manufacturer, we have geo, we have product table, and we have sales. So now we are going to make just one transformation. In order to connect these files, we want to connect the same types of data. So the zip column, which is a zip code, we are going to change that to a text file. And you'll see why we're going to do that. And then we want to replace the current step. So we've loaded the international sales folder into a query, and we're going to change that to a text. And when you hit OK, this now changes to the ABC, which is a text file. So now we have 5 queries: sales, product table, geo, manufacturer, and international sales. So you're going to notice a couple of things. We have the source name, which is the source of the file inside the folder. And then you have a country code. And if you were to scroll for the country code, not all of the countries are listed. So if you load more, that will bring up the rest of the countries. And it takes a few seconds to load. And now we have all of the different countries showing, which is Australia, Canada, Germany, Japan, Mexico, and Nigeria. So now that we've done that, we do not need the source name column. So from the source name, we can go to the home menu and click Remove Columns. So that will remove the source name column. So now we are left in international sales with product ID, date, zip, units, revenue, and country. And so we have now loaded the data, and we've made a couple of transformations of the data in Lab 1, which is loading and accessing data. So the next step in our video in Lab 1, Part 2, will focus in on the data preparation. This is Part 1 of Dashboard in a Day 2023. In Part 2, we will go to data preparation in Power BI. Back in Power BI, we continue along with our Learning Power BI by doing the Dashboard in a Day. The best way to learn Power BI is to get in with a real data set. I'll put the description to the link of the Dashboard in a Day below, but you can also search for it in your browser, and Dashboard in a Day is a 3 to 4 hour exercise. In Part 1, we loaded our data. Today in Part 2, we're still in Lab 1. There's 5 labs, and we are going to continue on with Lab 1, Dashboard in a Day, and we're going to do some data preparation. We're going to rename some columns. We're going to rename our queries. We're going to show you how to do change data from an example. We're going to do some comma delimiter splitting. So let's get into Power BI. Back in Power BI, and we are continuing along with our Dashboard in a Day 2023. If you have not watched Part 1, look for that at the link above. You can click the link above or also look on this channel. But Dashboard in a Day is a chance for you to learn Power BI step by step, and we're going through the 2023 edition. In the first step, we loaded the data. We loaded a CSV, we loaded a Excel, and we loaded a third type of source, files from a folder. So now we're going to continue along Part 2. And now at this point, we're going to start doing some of the data preparation. So the first thing we're going to want to do, this code at the top is called your M code inside each of these tables. And the steps of those M code are on the right-hand side. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this transform files and close this folder so that we have the other queries. So we have currently 5 queries: sales, product table, geo, manufacturer, and international sales. So the first one is sales. And if you look at the steps involved in the process, we've got the source, promoted headers, and change type. So the next step is to now start naming the table. So we're going to change product table, and we're going to rename that product. And we're going to rename the geo table to geography. Then we have manufacturer. We're just going to make a quick change and capitalize that. And then we have international sales. And all we're going to do to this one is just add the space between international and sales. So that is renaming tables. And that is going to still keep us at 5. And so now we're going to fill some of the empty values. So if you go to the product table, you'll notice we have in the category table, we have these nulls, and we have mix for the top one. So what we're going to do is with the product table, and we are going to select the category column. The next thing we're going to do is from the transform menu, we want to fill down. So we're going to take that mix, and it's going to fill that all the way down. And you see now in the category, everything has been changed to mix by filling that down. So we're going to stay in the product table, And the next thing we're going to try is splitting columns. Now remember, we're in the Power Query editor, and what we're doing is we're doing our data preparation. We're getting everything ready so we can start to make some formulas, and then eventually down the road, we are going to do some data visualizations. So what we want to do now is from the product column, you notice we have these products and they are separated by a couple of different things. They have this bar in the middle that separates the product from the type, which is all season. So if you go to split column and underneath the transform table, we are going to split by the delimiter. So the delimiter that we're going to split by is going to be the pipe symbol. And the pipe symbol is on your keyboard, and that is the pipe symbol. And when we hit OK on that, we are going to split by that pipe. So now we have product 2, which has all season, and we have product 1. So now we're going to rename the columns. So the product 1, we're going to just delete the period dot 1 and name that product. And then for the product 2, we're going to double click and name that segment. So now we have a product table, we have a segment column, and we're still doing all of this in the product. So again, we're preparing the data. And if you notice on the right-hand side, those applied steps get added to the changes on this query. So we're still in the product, we change the type, then we rename the columns. So now we're going to use a feature called Use Column from Examples to change the columns. So we're still going to stay in the product table. And what we're going to do is we are going to go to the price table, and we are first going to add a column. So you've got transform the current column, and then you've got adding columns. So we're going to make sure that our product query is selected. Then we're going to go to the add columns, and then we're going to go to this choose column from examples. And we're going to go from selection. The other option you have is from all columns. So we're going to go from selection. So now we're going to do some columns from examples. So if you type, we have price column selected, and we want to pull out that $412.13. If you noticed, all of the text after that delimiter now pulls that price out. And this is called adding columns from examples. And what we're going to do now is change the name to MSRP. And then we're going to hit OK. So now we've created a new column by adding a column and a column from example, and we've added the MSRP. So right now that's set up as a text column. This ABC is a text, and if you click on that little icon, we can now change that, and we're going to change that to a fixed decimal number to reflect dollars. So now that changed to the symbol, dollar symbol, and it's right justified on, and then we've changed the type too. So now we've added a column from example, we've renamed that column, and then we added the change type to add to a fixed decimal. So we're going to create the currency column in the same way. So now the next thing we're going to do, from all columns, we created our first column from example, and we're going to make our second one. And this time around, we're going to select the price category, and we are in the product table, price column, and we're going to do a column from selection. And what we're going to do here is we want to extract the USD into a column. So we're going to go USD, and all of those USDs become its own column, and we're going to name that currency. So we've extracted the column and rename that currency, and the next thing we're going to do is just hit OK, and now we've added 2 additional columns from that original import of data. So that's how quickly you can transform data, you can add additional information. We're creating these dimension tables so that later on, this is how we're going to filter and analyze some of our data. So we had a price as one column, and now we have the price as MSRP as a currency, and then we have the actual currency as text. So that is where we're at with adding columns from example. So now that we have that, we can remove this price column because that information is now duplicated into the MSRP and the currency. So what we can do is from the transform column at the beginning, you can right click and we can remove that price column. So now we're going to start removing unwanted rows. We're going to go back to the home table and we're going to go to the geography query. And if you notice, those first 2 rows at the top contain some null information. So we're going to remove rows, which is in the home column, and we're going to remove top rows. And we are going to remove those top 2 rows. And when you hit OK, now those null values. But now we have that first column, and that is what we want to actually get to the use first rows as headers. So we want to use the first row as headers, and now that'll bring up our zip, city, state, region, district, and country. So we're starting to transform this data so that we can use it. And the next thing we're going to do for the zip, we want to change this to text again, just like we did the last time. So we want to replace the current step. And the last time we did it in the sales column, this time we're doing it in the geography table. And then the final thing we're going to do with this data preparation is from the manufacturing table, we have some bottom rows that need to be deleted. So we're going to go back to the home table. We're going to remove the bottom rows, and we're going to remove the bottom 3 rows. So we're starting to transform this data and starting to be able to use this. And now we have completed some of the basic data preparation. So that's going to do it for part 2. In part 1, we loaded the data. And in part 2, we transformed the data. Again, I will put the link above, and you can look for it for the following along exercise. I'll put the dashboard in a day link in the description below. You can also search for it in your web browser. But again, the best way to use Power BI, your 5-step process for Power BI. Number 1 is to load the data. Then you start to prepare the data. Then you make your measures. And then you start to create your reports and visualizations. And then you finalize that for how you're going to share it, setting up your bookmarks and things like that. It's Dashboard in a Day 2023. This is part 2. And hope you're following along in learning Power BI. Power BI Dashboard in a Day 2023. We continue along in the Lab 1, which is all about importing the data, which we did in episode 1. And in part 2, we did some of the basic data preparation techniques, including columns from examples, setting up some of the comma delimiters. And here in part 3, we're going to continue on. We're going to finish off lab 1. The best way to learn Power BI is to get right in there. Again, I'll put the links in the description, or you can search dashboard in a day. But at the end of this, it's going to be 3 to 4 hours of hands-on experience working with Power BI, working through the student manual, and creating an initial dashboard connecting to data and starting to make some business insights. It's part 3, data transformation, dashboard in a day. Part 3, make sure to watch part 1 and 2, and let's go to Power BI. Let's continue on with lab 1, transposing data, and we are going to continue along in Power BI. Now we have our queries, and we haven't loaded these queries yet. We're still working on the transformations. On the left-hand side, we have 5 queries: sales, product, geography, manufacturing, and international sales. We rename those in part 2. Now we're going to transpose. So we're going to go to the manufacturing query, and if you notice, we have information across these columns. And we want to get them more into a data preparation mode where we can use those. So we're going to go to column 1, and then we're going to go to the transform tab. And at this point, what we want to do is actually transpose that data. So when you look at it, up underneath the transform, you'll see the transpose button. And this rotates it so that you can then see it. And what we want to do now is bring that first row as a header. So that brings up manufacturer ID, manufacturer, and logo as the header. So those go into the applied steps as well on that Power Query. And on the right-hand side, it says transpose table, promoted headers, and then it changed the type because all 3 of these are text columns. So now we're going to work on what's known as appending queries. There's 2 types of transformations. You have appending queries and you have merging queries. And for appending queries, we're going to go to the sales query, which is then we're going to go down to, we want to append this to the international sales table. So under the Home tab, we have append queries. And we're going to append queries, and we're going to do 2 tables. And the table that we want to append to the sales table is the international sales table. So we want to put these on top of one another. Rather than having 2 queries, we want to just have 1 query and put them on top of one another. And we're going to append the international sales table to the sales table. So then that goes into the steps on the right side. So now we have a sales column called country. And there's null values in there. So here's the country column, and you have those null values. So what we're going to do now then is add a column, and it's going to be a conditional column. So what we're going to do now is take that country, go to the add column, and the type of column is going to be a conditional column. So we're going to add and name this column called country name. And the conditions are going to be if country equals, we're going to add null because we have all of those nulls. And the value output is going to be USA because those USA sales did not have the country column. They were just assumed to be in USA sales. So now we're going to fill all those nulls with the USA, and we're going to make that. And then the only thing is if it's not null, we're just going to select the column, and that is going to be country. So this will help us, again, data preparation. It's going to be country name as the column. If country equals null, it's going to be USA. And if it's country, that is going to add that column. So all we need to do now is just add the country name. We have the original country, and now we have country name, and that is in the applied steps. Now, the initial country column containing the null values, we do not need that any longer. So we're going to remove that column. And remember, there's a couple of different ways you can remove columns. You can either go back to the Home tab and remove columns, but we're going to right-click and hit remove. So we've now removed that column. We've added a country name table, and we have that all set up. And the next thing we're going to do is we are going to rename this to country. We couldn't name it country before because we had that existing country name table in there. And the only other thing we're going to do is make this a text. We're going to change the data type to text. Therefore, we're going to change the revenue column now to fixed decimal number, because then that'll be a revenue, and that is going to notice the $ change. So the new named country column will have names for all of the countries. If you notice, if we load more, we can get all of the different country names into that column, and it's showing just the initial one. So the next thing we want to do is go to the international sales file. We updated the null values to USA, and we now have a country column with a text format, and we also have the revenue changed to a decimal number. For currency, the next thing in international sales, since we appended that to sales, we want to right-click and uncheck the enable load. Because we have appended that data to the sales table, it'll take longer if we enable the load. Every time we hit refresh, it will load up sales and international sales. And since international sales is now part of the sales table when we appended it, we can uncheck that, and that goes to an italics, and that is now unable to load, and that will just make this data file more efficient and quicker when you're updating your queries and loading. So the next thing we want to do is from the View tab is to show you the query dependencies. This is a way to look at we'll make this bigger so that you can see, and we'll make it a little bit bigger on the zoom level. But now you see your load disabled on the international sales, and your sales, we have not loaded any of this data yet. So that is what we're going to be doing at the end of the lab 1 here. Remember, this is part 3 of Dashboard in a Day, and there's 5 labs. This is lab 1, and we see the query dependencies. The next thing we want to do is go to the file and close and apply all of these changes. So we've added all of these queries, we've added the data sources, we've made our data transformation changes, and now we are going to close and apply. So this will take quite a bit because we've got all of our sales tables that need to load, we've got our geography tables that need to load, and the sales table is quite of a large table, but at least now we're not loading some of the different things. So then what we're going to do now is, after this loads, is we're going to save this file. If you have not saved yet, we are going to save this file. I've named it Dashboard in a Day Part 3, but this is Lab 1. So that's what we're going to do now, is after all of these changes, we're going to update that name and be ready for Lab number 2. So that is how we initially go into the data transformation stage of Power BI. So when you're learning Power BI, remember, at the end of the day, you're going to try to answer business questions. But the first step is to connect to your data. The second step is to transform the data. Cleaning and extracting and connecting your data is probably going to be about 60% of your time when you're in Power BI as a Power BI developer. Now, there are also people that use Power BI, but they are more users. So we're designing a lot of these dashboards for other people to use for the visualizations. So that is the end of Lab 1. The data has been loaded, and we now have our geography table, our manufacturer table, the product table, and the sales table, and we are ready for lab number 2. If you have a question, leave that in the comments below. We're going to go to lab number 2, and we're going to continue on with Dashboard in a Day 2023. Remember to save your file under File. We're going to save this into our folder and have this as Lab 1 complete. Lab 1 complete, Dashboard in a Day 2023 in Power BI. Power BI Dashboard in a Day 2023. We continue on in lab number 2. Now in lab 1, Dashboard in a Day, there are 3 videos, and in those videos we basically import the data from some different data sources, then we make some Power Query transformations, and in lab 2, now that we have the data loaded, we're going to start working on exploring that data, and we're going to build our basic relationships. Now remember, one of the advantages of Power BI is with multiple sources of data, you can build those relationships, and we're going to talk about how to build those with our demo model, and then we're going to take a look at some of the data explorations and get a look at that model view in Power BI. It's Dashboard in a Day, lab number 2, and let's go to Power BI. Dashboard in a Day, lab number 2, and this time around we finished off lab 1 with our 4 queries: geography, manufacturer, product, and sales. And Dashboard in a Day number 2, we are going to start working on relationships. We will also take a look at the 3 different views in Power BI. So when you open Power BI, you have a blank screen, and on the right-hand side you see our data, which is where we left off in lab number 1. This is called the report view, and the report view is where eventually we will do our visualizations. The second view is the data view, and in the data view, that is where you can actually see what the data looks like. So that's where we have our geography data, the manufacturing data, the product data, and the sales data. And then the model view is where you set up some of your preliminary relationships so that we can make this a relationship database. So we're going to continue on with Power BI, and after taking a look at the top 3 views, you can start to navigate around different areas of the Power BI. You have your home menu, you have your modeling menu, you have your optimize menu. So the one thing we're going to want to do is go to the data view, and we're going to look at the sales data. So the sales data includes the country, the date, the product ID, revenue, units, and zip. And also you have formatting. You can do some table tools, you have external tools, and you can also set up some of your basic formatting. So what we want to do now is we're going to go to the relationship model, and we are going to take a look at some of the different tables that we have in this model. So we'll be doing that in a few minutes. Right now, we're kind of just going to have set up an automatic relationship between the manufacturer table and the product table, which we'll delete that just so that we'll start fresh. And also we have our sales table, and that is over here, and we're going to delete that relationship as well. So we're going to have all 4 of our tables that we're going to start to build our relationship model with. And first off, what we're going to do is kind of give you an overview of some of the different types of relationships that you can do. So in the report view, the first thing we are going to do is select the clustered column chart from the visualization pane. So these are all of the different type of visualizations that you can do in Power BI. So when we choose those visualizations, we can then take a look, and the first one we're going to choose is what's known as the clustered column chart. And you click on that and it brings up the different chart options. Now what we want to do is input, you've got your x-axis, you've got your y-axis, and you've got your legend. So the thing we want to do is we want to bring in from the x-axis, we want to go to the geography table, and we want to select the country table. Now that doesn't do anything until we actually bring up the y-axis. And in the y-axis, we're going to go to the sales table. We're going to click on the revenue field. And if you notice, we now have all of the different countries. We have the revenue by country, but they all list it as the same. And the reason why it does that is because the relationship has not been set up. And the sum of revenue is the same for all of those. So now we're going to go to the relationship view and set up our relationship. We are in the report view in Power BI. Now, if we go to the relationship and try to create a relationship between the zip codes of the geography table and the sales table, you are going to get an error message that says it's a many-to-many relationship. And this is what we do not want. We usually want to have a one-to-many relationship. So we are going to cancel out of this, and we are going to create a new column. And you can create new columns inside these tables. The first one we're going to create is inside geography. And in the table tools, we're going to create a new column. The new column is going to be called zip country. And this is going to be the sales zip code. And the parentheses will bring in the comma, because anything inside parentheses is treated as text. And then we're going to add the sales country. So that'll create the first column inside the sales table. So it's going to work on it. So inside the sales table, we have a zip country. So now we're going to go to the geography table and create a column. The column is going to be called zip country. And formula is going to be zip country equals geography zip. Then we want the comma inside quotations. Then we're going to add geography country. We're going to close out the parentheses. Actually, we're going to cancel the parentheses. So we got geography zip equals zip and geography country. So we're going to create that column. So now if we go back to the model view, we can create our first relationship. So from the geography table to the sales table, we're going to use those two new columns that we created, and this is going to create the relationship. So we're going to take the zip country from the geography table, drag it to the sales table. That is going to create a 1. The 1 side is on the geography. That's what that 1 is. And then on the asterisk on the sales is the one-to-many relationship. And once we do that, that is going to see, if you go back to the report menu, now you see the correct totals come up on the revenue by country. Now that we have the relationship working with the geography and the sales, we're going to add in 2 additional relationships. We've got the manufacturer ID, and we are going to bring that over to the manufacturer ID in the product table. And that's a one-to-many relationship, the one for manufacturer, and the product is the many side. And then we're going to add in the product ID to the product ID. So now we have the one side is the product, the many side is the sales. And a lot of times that is what happens because the sales ends up becoming the fact table, which allows more for the values in your visuals. So now we're going to add to our chart. Inside the legend, we're going to go to the manufacturing table and add the manufacturer. And that is going to add in the different legends for all the different manufacturers. So that is how you can build out your tables and start to drive some of your insights. So we're going to try a different visual. So currently we have this one selected here, which is the clustered column chart. So now we're going to try the stacked column chart. And that visualizes it a little bit differently, but it shows the total revenue and how it's broken into. So what we can do now is add in and sort the legend by descending. And that'll bring in the highest to the lowest from left to right, which is what makes it easier to read for the viewer. And remember, when you're designing your visuals, we'll talk about this more when we get into Lab 5, is you want to make the visuals so that people can get kind of tell a story with the visual. Now that we have the visual, we are going to start to show you some of the filter pane options. So we want to filter the top N, and we're going to select the top 5, and then we are going to bring over the revenue. And when we apply this filter, that is going to show us the top 5. So that is an example of how to use the filters. We're now going to go back to the main part of the visual, and we are going to focus in on some of the exploration options of some of the data we have. So if we go to the formatting of the visual, if you click on this brush icon, this will add or remove elements. And what we are going to do now is take a look at some of the different formatting options. So if we want to see data labels, we can click those on. So now we have the data labels showing in each of those visuals. So that's an example of showing the data levels. So now we can remove the total labels. So right now, if you wanted to see the total labels, you could have the totals and you could turn those off. One of the advantages of Power BI for your advanced data analysis is you can do groupings inside the different columns to create some additional metrics so that you can keep track of your top competitors. So if you are in the manufacturing query and you right click, you can create a new group. And we're going to create a new group, and we're going to include, by pressing down the control key, you will hit Aliquot, Cirrus, Natura, and Pyram. So that'll be the group. So we're going to add them, group them, and now they become a different group. Now for the name of the group, we are going to name this Top Competitors. So this allows us to create a group. The second group we are going to create is a Van Arsdale group. So we're going to select that, hit group, and then we are going to name this Van Arsdale. And then we're going to check this box that says include other group to rename the rest of the groups. So we're continuing along in Power BI. If you notice on the right-hand side now, we have a Top Competitors group, we have a Van Arsdale group, and we're slowly starting to explore this data in Power BI. The more features that you can take advantage of with grouping and with doing some of the different visualizations. That is how the Power BI users are going to get the most out of Power BI. We're continuing along in Lab 2. This is Part 4. If you want to watch Parts 1, 2, and 3, make sure to look for them in the channel below. And again, you can do a search in your search bar for Digital Dashboard in a Day and download the materials and follow along as we continue to learn Power BI. Dashboard in a Day, Power BI, and we continue on learning Power BI. What I like about Dashboard in a Day, if you're thinking about making the switch to Excel or want to start learning Power BI, this tutorial is a step-by-step approach to show you just some of the different capabilities. We kind of keep it at the high level end for just ease of use, but then if you follow along, you can see something. There's always something you can do in Power BI that applies to your business situation. And that's what you're trying to do with Power BI, is answer business questions. In Part 1, we loaded the data. In Part 2, we did some data transformations and data prep in Part 3. In Part 4, we started to do some basic explorations, did some groupings. And in Part 5, we're going to do some more data explorations, show you some of the possibilities that you can use in Power BI. After you transform your data and load your data, then you can start to explore a little bit with your data and make some better business decisions for the people that actually consume the Power BI templates that you design. So let's go back into Power BI. Now that we've created our manufacturer groups, and one of the things I did redo this is I renamed this first group, which includes the Aliquid, Curis, Natra, and Pyrum top competitors, and then we changed the name of the group to manufacturer groups. So now that we have that set up, we can change out the legend and we can add data and we can add in the manufacturer group to see our top competitors, Van Arsdale, and other. And this shows that the top competitors in the USA comprise a lot of the sales. Meanwhile, in Australia, the top competitors also comprise a lot of the top sales. So now we will click in the open area. We are going to create a tree map. And this tree map is a way of showing proportions to that revenue. So for the values from the sales table, we are going to add in revenue. And for the category, we are going to add in the manufacturer. So this shows proportionally Van Arsdale has the highest proportion of sales, as they are this large blue number. Now, when you click on Van Arsdale, this cross filters our stacked bar chart. And if you unclick that, then it goes back to what it does. That's called cross highlighting. So that's just another example of some of the different things you can do in Power BI with your visualizations. So another thing you can do is you can show as a table. So if you want to see the raw numbers, you can look at this as a table. It'll show you the USA sales, the top competitor sales, and the Van Arsdale sales by country. And if you click on this back to report, that will bring you back to the report view. So now we have our tree map, we have our stacked bar chart, we've created a group here to explore some of our data. And the next thing we are going to do is continue along with our data exploration as we start to build out this chart. So if you take a look at the highlighting of the Van Arsdale by clicking on that, that is called cross highlighting. So now we want to do is start working on the page filters. The next filter we are going to create is called a page level filter. So if we select the manufacturer group and apply it to this page, that means we could start to, if we wanted to select the top competitors, that would filter out on this page. If we wanted to select Van Arsdale, we could filter out the Van Arsdale sales. So that's an example of some of the different filtering. And if we want to take a look at the sales over time, now we can create another visual. We'll move this up a little bit. We're going to make this smaller. And we're also going to move the stacked bar chart. So now we have our different filters and we can see the different tree map also. So the next thing we're going to do is do a visual that shows a little bit of a time series. And normally when you do time series, you want to look at date hierarchy. So that's what we're going to create next here in Power BI. In order to create the date hierarchy, we need to change and update the options in our file. So if you notice on the sales, we have a column called date, and we need to make that a date field. So we are going to select under File, and we're going to go to Options and Settings. Now under Options and Settings, you have a couple of different things you can do. You have, for the global options and settings, this is every time you use Power BI, we're going to focus in here on the current file. So under the current file, under the data load, we are going to select this auto date time, and this will help us create our hierarchy. Now there's lots of different options in the current file. You can set your regional settings, you can set your privacy settings, but for the data load, we're going to select the auto date and time. Then we are going to select OK. So what that is going to help us do is create a date hierarchy. So now it's got this little calendar icon under the date. And if you notice, we have a date hierarchy created, which includes the year, the quarter, the month, and the day. So with that information, this data hierarchy, we're going to create our next visual. Time to create the next visual, and this one is going to be a clustered column chart. So we're going to select the white area on the report view, select new, and this pops up. And now we're going to start to build out this chart to see that date hierarchy to show you kind of how this works. So the first thing we're going to do is for the x-axis, we are going to bring in this date hierarchy. And now for the y-axis, we are going to bring in our revenue. And this shows you the revenue by year in this date hierarchy. So we see 2014 all the way to 2021. And again, if you start to cross highlight, we've got this, you can select a year and the other years will start to cross highlight. Back in the report view, we are now going to take a look at the different sales by year. So we're going to click on the stacked column chart, and now we're going to do is click on the icon to add data and build your visual. We're going to remove the legend. And when we remove the legend, this allows us to see all of the sales by country, sum of revenue by country, and then we have our tree map, and then we have our newest visual, which shows kind of a time series on the sum of revenue by year. So if we now go to the tree map, we can take a look at the manufacturer. And if we want to, we'll highlight all of them, so we're not filtering anything out. If we select on Van Arsdale, this shows us the revenue by year. Now, if we select on Control, over here, we now can see Australia highlighted in all three of the charts. So that shows you how you can do, and you kind of see a spike in some of the different chart areas. So this shows you a little bit more how you can visualize your chart. The next visual to show you is the drill down feature. If you select the sum of revenue by year and you select the drill down, you can see the next level in the hierarchy. So right now it's showing by year. And this hierarchy, if you look at the date hierarchy, it goes year, quarter, month, and day. So if we go back to this visual and click the down button, this will now show us quarter because that's the next quarter in the hierarchy. If we click down again, it'll show us by month, and then the bottom level of the hierarchy is the day. So you literally can see the day. Now to get that back up to the top of the hierarchy, you hit the drill up arrow, and then it goes back up to the month, and it goes to the quarter, and back to the year. So that is a look at the drill down feature in Power BI. We are in Lab 2, Part 5. And remember, all of the different data exploration techniques, some of these you're going to use more than other. Make sure to watch the videos, Part 1, 2, 3, and 4, where we load the data. We start to do some of the data prep. And then here in Part 5, we actually drill down and start to explore the data. So we're going to finish up and move along here in Lab 2 as we continue along with the data exploration. Dashboard in a day, Power BI, and we continue on learning Power BI. What I like about Dashboard in a day, if you're thinking about making the switch to Excel or want to start learning Power BI, this tutorial is a step-by-step approach to show you just some of the different capabilities. We kind of keep it at the high level end for just ease of use, but then if you follow along, you can see something. There's always something you can do in Power BI that applies to your business situation. And that's what you're trying to do with Power BI, is answer business questions. In Part 1, we loaded the data. In Part 2, we did some data transformations and data prep in Part 3. In Part 4, we started to do some basic explorations, did some groupings. And in Part 5, we're going to do some more data explorations, show you some of the possibilities that you can use in Power BI. After you transform your data and load your data, then you can start to explore a little bit with your data and make some better business decisions for the people that actually consume the Power BI templates that you design. So let's go back into Power BI. Back in Power BI Lab 2, we continue on with data exploration. The next two things we're going to do is show you how to add a slicer, show you some of the different slicer options. Then we are going to add a card visual that helps show data in a number. So let's take a look. First off, from your data visualization gallery, you do have what looks like a filter. It's a funnel, and it's called a slicer. And if you click on a white area in the report view and then click on the slicer will come up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use the field from the manufacturer to have a list of manufacturers as our slicer. So that's where we're currently at. We currently have all of those different available. And if you click on the Van Arsdale, it will start to filter the other visuals. So if you click on Van Arsdale, your revenue by country changes, your tree map changes, and also the revenue by month changes. The next thing we're going to do is change this slicer. If you click on, we'll click off all of the options. And if you click on the more options, the slicer settings, and you have three different types of slicers. You can do a vertical list, a tile, or a drop down. So we can make this a drop down, and then now we can choose whichever one we want for the slicer. So those are some different slicer options. Then the next thing we're going to do is show you when we take a look at the card visuals, we're going to click in a blank area. And for your card visual, it's this little card visual that looks like a 1, 2, 3. If you click on this, and then you've got two options. You've got the add data to build your visual. And then once you get that in there, this one doesn't have any other options. So we're going to add the data. And for the data, we're going to go back to sales and add in the revenue. We're going to make this a little bit bigger. And now we have the revenue and we can start to filter that for all of the different countries. It's 2.7. If we click on the Van Arsdale, it's 1.28 billion. So that is a look at the slicer and the card value. And the next thing we're going to do is build one of our first formulas. We're going to create a new table, and that is going to be called a calendar table. So the first thing you want to do is go to the sales table by clicking on this little cylinder icon. That'll bring up all of your different tables, and we are going to click off all of those. And in the insert, we're going to insert from the modeling menu. You can do a new table, a new column, a new parameter. We'll talk more about those later on, but the new table is going to be a calendar table. And the formula for that is going to be calendar. And we're going to call this a date table, which is the name of the table. And it's going to be calendar, which is the function. And we're going to bring in the date, which is in parentheses 2014, the 1st of January. We're going to close out the parentheses, so that's the start date. Then the end date after the comma is date, and that is going to be 2022, and it's going to be 12/31, December 31st. So now we have a table that has a start date and an end date. 2014 is the start date, January 1st, and the end date is 2022, December 31st. We've created the date table, so now we're going to select that date table, go to the data view, and currently the date type is date time. We are going to switch that to date. Now we are going to go to the model view, and we're going to set up a relationship between the date table and the sales table. So we are going to bring date over to date, and that is going to create a one-to-many relationship between the two tables. And then at this point, we're going to start to clean this up a little bit. We have our geography table, we have our sales table, manufacturer, which is connected to the product table, and the product table goes to the sales table. So we're going to put the manufacturer table right up there, and now we're going to bring over the date table to add that to the relationship. The relationship has been created. Now let's go see what it looks like in our report view. And you notice the sum of revenue by date chart now has a date that goes down to each of the individual days. And the reason for this is we have the date set up to the sales table. So we are going to delete that. And now we're going to bring in from the date table that date function. And then we're going to have it set up now with the same type of formatting. And if we want to bring this up, we can drill this back up to the month, quarters, and back up to the years. So that is how and then what we're going to do is go back to the sales table. And since that's now going to be our official date table, we want to right click on the date and we want to hide. That way we only take the date column. It's not even an option on the sales table. So that is one way to make sure your models are efficient. We're going to hide that. And we are also going to hide zip country from the geography table. So that will hide that. And then we're going to hide manufacturing ID from the manufacturing table. And the reason why is we want to use those, and we'll learn more about this in our relationships, but you want to make your models easy for the users, and then we're going to hide product ID and manufacturer ID from the product table. So product ID, we'll hide that, and then we're going to hide the manufacturer ID from the product table. So now we've made it up so we can use, it's best practice to hide fields that are not used in the report visuals. And these fields are the basis of our relationships between each of those tables. So when you go back to relationship view, the columns that we just hid, showed by this little icon with the not shown icon, that means those are the relationships. Zip country is used as the relationship to sales, so we don't want that to show. Same thing with product ID and manufacturer ID, and then we have now hidden out those tables, and we can take a look at more of these when we get further into the dashboard in a day. Let's continue along with our data visualization and exploration. Now we currently have the sum of revenue by country chart selected, and we are going to add some additional hierarchies. So if we go to the geography field and select state, that will bring in the state data. And then if we go back to geography and put in the district, that'll bring in the district. So now we talked earlier about the date hierarchies. Now we can drill up and drill down by either selecting Aliqui or Natura, or we can select Van Arsdale. And the drill down feature, we can click to turn on drill down. Then if we click on Australia, we can see the breakdown by the Van Arsdale revenue. And if we click on 2021, you get the cross highlighting across the chart, $70 million. And the sum of revenue by manufacturer also does highlight. So that is a look at some of the cross highlighting and the hierarchy. And now we've made a date hierarchy, and we've got a geography hierarchy. So now let's go to the product table, and we're going to make a product hierarchy. So if you go to the product table, and we are going to select to the right of the category field, we're going to select the create hierarchy. And this creates the category hierarchy. And now we bring in the different layers that we want in that hierarchy. So the three things that we want is category, segment, and product. So we already started out with category. That's already there. Now we add the segment category. We're going to add to the hierarchy. We're going to add it to the category hierarchy. And then we're going to do the product, click on the right clicks, and then we're going to add that to the category hierarchy. So now we have and then we're going to name this product hierarchy. So now we have a product hierarchy that includes category, segment, and product. We will select on a blank area of the canvas. We'll move this up here, and we'll go back down here, and now we'll create a clustered bar chart where we'll use this product hierarchy, and we'll bring in the data pane. And what we're going to do now is bring in our y-axis is going to be from the product table, is going to be the product hierarchy, and the x-axis is going to be the revenue. And now we can take a look at, we can drill down by segment, and then we can drill down further by product. In the sum of revenue by category visual, we have now shown you how you can drill down to the next level. And you can also, from the visual gallery, see some of the different options in your data view This time around, we are going to go to the data gallery and change it to a matrix table. And a matrix table works the same way. You can drill down to the next level in the hierarchy or drill back up. And when you drill down, you can see some of the different options. So with that, we are now going to add from the data table to the value menu, we are going to add revenue again. And so this is a duplicate right now. And if we right click on this, we can show this as a percentage of grand total. And the only other thing we're going to do now to this chart, as we look at some of the different options, you can see how quickly you can build out your visuals and take a look at the data from the pane. So those are just some more examples of way to use the visualizations on the matrix or on your other visualizations. The data exploration continues. We've did some data visualization and started to explore the data, and now you get to the point in Power BI where you start to work on some of your calculations. There's two types of calculations you can do. One is a calculated column, which is evaluated row by row in that column of the table. A second one is a measure, when we want to aggregate values from many rows of the table. We're going to create our first measure in this table. The first thing we are going to do is select the sales table, and if you click on the ellipsis, you will see a new measure. We will click on the new measure, and the first measure we are going to create is prior year sales. Now, prior year sales is going to be the name of this measure, and we're going to use a calculate function, and we're going to use the sum of the sales revenue, and we're going to close out that parentheses. Then we're going to use the same period last year, and we're going to bring up our date table. So we're going to bring up our date, and that is going to close out the measure. And now we have a measure on the sales table called prior year sales. And we're going to create another measure using a little bit different method this time around. And this time around, we are going to use the modeling feature, and we're in the sales table, and we're going to click the new measure up here at the top, just underneath the home menu. And so the new measure this time around is going to be called percentage growth. And percentage growth is going to be the name. And when you're writing DAX, which is the language of the measures inside Power BI, you can also use it in Excel. Percentage of growth is going to equal the divide function, and we're going to divide the sum of sales revenue, close out the parentheses, we're going to minus left bracket previous year's sales. So you can use measures inside other measures, and then now we're going to close out that measure. So previous year's sales growth is going to be divide sum of sales revenue minus previous year's sales, comma, previous year's sales. So you can use the measure inside other measures. So when we add this measure, we now have two measures, and it's the icon of the little calculator. We have percentage growth, and we also have a previous year's sales measure. So if we click on the matrix, we can add the new measure, which is percentage of growth, and we also can add the previous year's sales to that measure. So that is how you're going to start to add your measures to your matrices and your visuals as you continue in your Power BI. So we're going to make this a little bit bigger so that you can see the percentage of growth. The only thing we need to do is the percentage of growth needs to be a percentage, and we're going to change that to 1 decimal spot for the percentage. So you'll see the growth of the different categories. If we want to drill up, If we drill all the way up, we can see that youth was percentage of growth 2%, 22% for mix, a negative growth for rural, and you can see the previous year's sales on this matrix. One of the advantages of your measures is that you can format the measure once, and then every time you use that measure, it will already be formatted. So every time we use that percentage growth measure, it'll be formatted as a percentage with 1 decimal. And what we're going to do now is take the prior year sales, and we're going to make sure that that format is currency. And we're also going to double check that revenue is set at currency. So those are just some of the options. Remember, with Power BI, you can always reuse your measures in other measures, and we have completed Lab 2 of the Dashboard in a Day 2023. The first 6 lessons cover parts Labs 1 and 2, where we import the data, and then we also transform that data and start to work with measures and do some exploratory analysis of the visualization. So we've got 3 labs to go, labs 3, 4, and 5, and you can check out the other videos in this series, Dashboard in a Day 2023.